The other thing, Rachel, that I really want to implore to your listeners and your
Yeah.
audience is that change was happening in Iran. So change was happening, but guess what's happened in the past 2 days since this little escapade that Israel and America launched? There is now a crackdown on human rights activists within the country. There is now a
Wow.
crackdown on artists, on painters, on people, on dissidents within the country. So the only thing, and I wrote about this in the Globe and Mail 10 days ago,
Yeah.
I said the only people who are going to lose are going to be the actual people that they purport to want to save.
Hello, I'm Rachel Gilmore, your least favorite person's least favorite journalist. Welcome to Bubble Pop, the show where we talk about some of the biggest headlines and juiciest news tidbits so you don't have to doom scroll. Today, we're talking about the United States' illegal attack on Iran. Yeah, politicians are trying to say that it was legal, but international law experts say otherwise. And I'm inclined to listen to them over politicians. On top of all of that, CNN reporting on leaked intelligence suggests that the attack didn't even achieve the goal that politicians are using to justify this illegal act, the destruction of Iran's nuclear sites. Meanwhile, before the United States got involved at Israel's behest, Israel had already lobbed strikes on Iran, killing hundreds of Iranian civilians, and prompting Iran to launch retaliatory strikes that killed 28 people in Israel. Altogether, the two countries fought for about 12 days before a tenuous ceasefire was struck. One Israel immediately violated, but that has otherwise held. But during those same 12 days, Israel killed at least 870 Palestinians in its ongoing genocide on Gaza. This is the reality that prompted a group of journalists titled Canadian Journalists for Justice in Palestine to speak out this week with a press conference to remind us of our professional and ethical duties. Quote, to report courageously, to challenge power unequivocally, and to fiercely protect the integrity of our profession and the safety of our colleagues. The world is watching, and history will remember how we respond. Samira Mohyeddin, an award-winning Iranian Canadian journalist, was among those who spoke out this week. It's not a surprise she was there. Samira has been fearlessly reporting on the genocide, putting many folks with far more institutional support to shame. On top of that, she has both the lived and journalistic experience to provide Canadians with essential context. That's why I am so thrilled to welcome Samira on the show today. Samira, welcome to Bubble Pop.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for having me.
Thank you for being on. I am so excited to have you here. I was actually just listening last night to your interview for The Hatchet, and it was incredible. Like, I learned so much about your story, and you're a total
Did that
badass.
come out with Archie? That's out?
It
I didn't.
did. Yeah. Yeah, I listened to it last night. It was so good. Now, I wanted to start out. Obviously, it's been a very big week or couple weeks and months and years in the news. But I want to start by asking you to kind of help Canadians understand the situation that we saw in Iran over the last 2 weeks, because you have a level of expertise and context that you bring to the table that I think is incredibly important right now. So what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you have noticed in the coverage of these both American and Israeli attacks on Iran?
Yeah, I think Rachel, the biggest it's not even a misconception, it's almost a promulgation of a lie, is that Iran is the aggressor here. When it's not. I think that is the biggest thing. And the other biggest thing is that Iran was a nuclear threat. you know, uh, Rafael Grossi already came out. This is the general director of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and said Iran was years away, years from being able to develop any sort of bomb. And that's if Iran wanted to develop a bomb. There was no indication of that happening. And then the other thing that I think is important to point out is that we don't even know, after the US bombed Fordo, we don't really know at this point what really that bomb did. According to CNN, it didn't destroy the entire area. To which, Trump responded by calling CNN scum when it put out this report. So we don't know. And then the other thing, I mean, this isn't a big thing and people might not know this, but Iran is a country that sits on some of the most seismic faults in the world. It is
Mm,
so prone to earthquakes. And I was watching this video that the Wall Street Journal had made, and they were talking to a person named Tom Krakow, who's from a weird outfit called Missile Defense Systems. And he was basically explaining this 30,000-pound bomb. This is a non nuclear bomb that the US has never used before. It is
wow.
the largest non nuclear bomb that you could use. It's a 30,000-pound bomb. And he was basically on camera saying, what you want to do is penetrate with one bomb, so one 30,000-pound bomb, and then you drop another one to go even further down. And then he looks in the camera and he says, you basically want to cause an earthquake. And I was thinking
Wow.
to myself, this is wild, because 12 hours before the US dropped this bomb, Fox News, Wall Street Journal, NBC, and even Scientific American and the CBC's David Common were all explaining in a weird sort of reverie and in awe of this bomb. They were all like, this is what it can do, and this is what it does. And I was like, there is no at all talk of what the environmental and human risks are of exploding such a thing. Iran was basically Nagasaki 2.0 testing ground for the US when it dropped this bomb uh,
Wow.
on Fordo, Natanz, and in Esfahan. So we still don't know yet what the ramifications of it were. But these are the types that this is the rhetoric that is so dangerous that the media just like pushes. And again, humans are totally just out of the equation whenever we're seeing these types of broadcasts. And so it's
Yeah.
very troubling. I mean, at least to me, uh,
Absolutely. It should
it-
be troubling to everyone. It's unfortunately it doesn't always seem to be, but it should be. Yeah, I think that one thing that I've found really striking are the assumptions that have been baked into coverage of this. Like, you're talking about people discussing the way the bomb works and talking about this bomb with a reverie. This was an illegal act. Even if, politicians are coming out saying,
do we even care what's illegal
like,
anymore? Does
well,
international law even
exactly.
exist? Yeah.
Exactly. And it is, the United States and Israel that are attacking international law and setting precedents of, international law for some countries and not for others. And meanwhile, Canada is supporting these actions while claiming to be a world leader in international law. And
Oh
I
my
think that
God. That was
it's
so
infuriating.
painful listening
Yeah.
to Carney. Listening to Carney over the past week has
Oh
been
my God.
so painful. And his comment yesterday about, yeah, we have a Palestinian state as long as it's Zionist. What?
I
I
literally
mean,
had a question at the end of the interview about this for you because I had to
oh,
ask you about that. We
let's come
can,
back to it then. Yeah.
okay, we'll put a pin in it. So you guys got to stick around because we got some good stuff coming. But, I think that a question that a lot of folks have here, like, especially when you consider all of the stuff you just laid out, right, is why. I mean, if the purported goal was to destroy the nuclear sites, first of all, it failed. And if the purported goal was to stop Iran from having nuclear weapons, all the experts that I have heard from, and you can let me know if this reflects your understanding as well, because you know way more about this than I do, say that this, if anything, would create more interest in weaponization. And this is, I'm just going to quickly explain this for the listeners. The way that you make a nuclear bomb, I'm not giving you a guide right now, but the steps that a state has to, the knowledge they have to have in order to do it is they have to know how to enrich uranium. Iran knows how to do that, but there are civilian purposes for that. You can use it for nuclear power. You can use it for all kinds of things. This is a technology that other countries are able to use and have that self-determination to have their own energy programs. But once you enrich uranium up to 60%, it kind of speed runs, and it's faster, months rather than years, to get to 90%, which is the point that you need to hit to be able to put it in a nuclear weapon. But even if you have, as Iran does, a stockpile of 60%, you aren't months away because you have to be able to take that 90% and put it into a warhead. That is called weaponization. It is extremely specialized knowledge that Iran would have to go out of its way to obtain. And it has shown no indication to want to obtain that. So it is not on the cusp of dropping a bomb on anyone. And I think that reality and all of the misinformation and the assumptions being made that this was somehow protecting the world from Iran's nuclear program, when if anything, it just exacerbated that risk, which also Israel has. It's widely believed to have nuclear weapons and hasn't committed to the same level of monitoring. And sorry, I'm just ranting at this point, but my point is, that clearly isn't the goal, to destroy Iran's nuclear program. They're either just really bad at achieving their goals or that's not the goal. So what do you think the USA and Israel were actually trying to achieve here?
I think there were a number of things. I think that first and foremost, this was a war of distraction from the genocide that Israel is conducting in Gaza. And it did a great job. Gaza fell way down, maybe on page 12 of any paper. And so that was completed, check mark that. The other thing is that a lot of people don't pay attention to is the propaganda embedded within what Israel is trying to do in Iran, which is regime change. Yes. So this Operation Rising Lion really appeals to a level of nostalgia that Iranians have about what their country was before the 1979 revolution. And so the IDF has a IDF Persian page where I start my mornings every day. It's on Instagram. And it really sets out to me what is being promulgated towards Iranians, both inside and outside of the country. And it's been quite effective. They do it in the Persian language. They use a mixture of nostalgia, misinformation, and quick, rapid sort of imagery, that combines the two. That is something that really needs to be looked at. I look at it all the time and I talk about it as much as I can. And then the other thing I think was to really use this bomb to see what happens when you use it. Because this isn't about Iran's nuclear capabilities or, developing a bomb. Iran's nuclear energy program began in 1975. Now, under the Shah, this is Mohammad Reza Shah, pre-revolution, Iran realized that it needs to provide, electricity, nuclear energy, like all of that stuff that a state does and is allowed to do. And in fact, the prime minister of Iran at the time in 1975, Prime Minister Hoveyda, came and visited the Pickering nuclear energy site here in Ontario. So they had started this program, but the revolution stopped it. This is what's interesting. The revolutionaries and the new government that was coming into power, they actually killed the man. They assassinated him. The man who was responsible for taking Iran nuclear. They killed him. Wow. And what ended up happening is that the war started with Iraq. So you had this 8-year war of attrition, and the nuclear plant that in Bushehr was bombed by Iraq during this time. So there was no development happening. And so that it was only after Iran achieved a little bit of stabilization that it started to bring back this plan to bring nuclear energy to the country. Now, Israel has gone and killed 14 of Iran's top scientists. Yes. This is another thing that nobody talks about. Yep. I mean, they have assassinated some of Iran's best and brightest who, according to Israel, were doing nefarious things. But even if they were, you have no right to kill 14 scientists. You know what I mean? Like, this is what, as we come back to that international law, Israel operates like a thug, like a mafia. And everything it has done, I mean, we could go back years, but the crippling of international law and this whole international rules-based order that Canada attests to, I mean, if Canada really believes its own reputation, it wouldn't be supporting Israel in the way that it does.
Yeah.
But it has shown, the Canadian government has shown, even before Carney, even during Trudeau, where he stood up and said, I am a Zionist, as if he was like at an AA meeting. Um, the way Canada has behaved has basically shown that it's willing to sacrifice its own reputation in the international community just to allow Israel to run roughshod over international law, which is so disappointing.
Yeah, and I one thing that I found really interesting that is part of this too is what really got me thinking about it was a great piece from our friend of the show, Paris Marks. He questioned why the U.S. should get to decide whether Iran has the ability to use nuclear power, particularly when Iran is a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and
The only
Israel.
signatory in the Middle East. Israel doesn't even acknowledge that it has warheads.
Exactly, exactly. So, I actually posted on Blue Sky and I asked people like what they want to know about this issue. And a question a lot of them had about this that ties really well into what Paris wrote as well is if Iran did have a nuclear weapon, would that actually compromise American or Israeli national security? Because it seems that nuclear weapons can be a really strong deterrent. That was what one user wrote. What do you make of that kind of analysis? And what are your thoughts on it in general?
You know, I, in order to sort of answer this question, I think I need to put myself in the position of Iran's leaders. So
Yeah.
you have a neighbor, Pakistan, share a border, who
Yeah.
is a nuclear power, has multiple nuclear warheads. You have India also having multiple nuclear warheads. If I was Iran, I'd be thinking to myself, I need to arm up.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, I mean, you asked this earlier, Iran now, if it didn't before, it will do that.
Yeah.
It has been given every incentive to do it. And I wonder, was this Israel's move? Was that the point? To push Iran to the brink of wanting to develop nuclear weapons? Because it just doesn't make any sense. It is such a schizophrenic way of conducting foreign policy. You
Yeah.
have this, but the thing is, it did it even in negotiations with Hamas to release the hostages, right? They were in negotiations, and what do? They murder and assassinate the head of the people they're negotiating with,
Oh my
Ismail
goodness.
Haniya. This was also in Tehran, right? So then
Yeah.
again, while Iran is at the negotiating table with the US, they go ahead and they kill the person that they were negotiating with. It just doesn't make
It
any
makes no
sense.
sense.
No, it shows that, and then what does the media do? It portrays the people who are being killed as the aggressor. We're living in this weird, I don't know, loop, spiral, what do you want to call it? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
The only thing that I see, actually, just to come back to your question about motivation, I think that Israel really wants to make Iran into another Syria, where it is crippled economically, it is crippled militarily. So basically, Israel is now controlling and was controlling Iran's skies for the past 3 days, where it was just relentlessly bombing Tehran, a city of 12 million. Um, and it's basically doing what it wants to do, what it has been doing in Syria, right? Coming in and bombing every once in a while, but the Syrian government is like, okay, if you want. Oh, you want to take that water? Okay, go ahead. We can't really do anything because you've, destroyed all our capabilities to retaliate against you. That is really what Israel wants in Iran. And this whole idea that it's coming to free people. I mean,
Yeah. I won't.
Iranians are not dumb. I can't even.
Exactly.
I'm
I
probably
wanted
gonna
to
get
ask you about
blocked.
that.
Yeah.
No, I wanted to ask you about that specifically, like about the whole idea of, regime change in Iran, because I think that it's a narrative we're seeing a lot in Western media.
Mhm.
And, a lot of people sort of manufacturing consent for regime change.
Oh
And I
my God.
don't,
Rachel,
yeah.
I'm watching CBC.
Hmm.
I was watching CBC. I decided to watch Newsnet on the day that Trump had called this truce, and then Israel bombed it like relentlessly
Yeah.
right after. I watched Newsnet from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. And the word regime change was said between 70 to 80 times. I can't remember the number. I tweeted out
Wow.
the exact number. Every single guest and every single host and every single guest that CBC News had on was either from the Middle East Institute, an extremely right wing think tank in the US. So people like Alex Vatanka. And then they also had the former editor in chief of the Jerusalem Post,
Oh my God.
Natasha Fata, asking him about regime change, regime change. And she kept coming back to it. Even when the guests were like, this isn't something that is really a good idea, she kept coming back and going, yeah, but what about regime change? Some
Oh
people
my
say
God.
now is the time. And I was like, what is this? What are
Yeah,
we doing here? How are you benefiting? How is journalism a public good right now? It's not.
exactly.
It
Yeah.
was so scary and disgusting to behold.
Absolutely. And so my understanding too is that like a lot of Iranians don't like the current regime, oppose the theocracy, but that doesn't
Highly,
mean that they
highly.
want, yeah, the figure I was told was something like 80%, but I think that might have just been
No,
an off the cuff guess, like
no,
guesstimate kind of thing. But does that
it's
sound
not
about
a
right?
guess. It's actually it is 80%.
Okay.
And this was a study done in 2018, and the number has
Okay.
probably gone higher by now. It's a research group in the
Mm,
university at the I think it's the University of Leiden in
okay.
Amsterdam. And it's just a fact,
Yeah.
particularly the young people. Particularly young people who are like, why do we have to live under these geriatric men who are,
Yeah.
Iran is a theocratic totalitarian system. And I know that right now within the landscape of what we're seeing on the streets, and it's garnering a lot of support from people who are in the pro-Palestinian movement, but this is a mistake.
Yeah.
It's a mistake from people who don't really understand the government there and the way that it brutalizes its own citizens, its own dissidents. And so that's something that it's almost a losing game when you bring that up, because people are always saying to you, this isn't the time to criticize Iran. Well, guess what? It's never a good time. It's never a good time, because when you do criticize the government, people see you as a warmonger, right? So it's a very precarious place to be as an Iranian who is both critical of the regime and critical of Israel and America. I always say to people, people message me, they're like, I don't understand. Why are you critical of Iran? And I say, because I can chew gum and walk at the same time. I have
Exactly.
plenty of hatred in my heart. I can spray it out to many,
Hell
many
yeah.
different governments. Okay. It's not just either this or that.
Yeah.
And I think people need to wake up to this reality a little bit.
Totally, totally. And I think that a nuance here that I think from the interviews I've done, and again, you know so much more than me, so you can tell me if my understanding of this is correct, is that there can be appetite for a different regime without them wanting an American or Israeli imposed regime change. And
Yes.
right now, there is not really a clear candidate. And this is where I want you to tell me if that my understanding is right. My understanding is there isn't really a clear opposition movement candidate that's sort of centralized for people to gather behind. The only options are Reza Shah, who is like an LA Nepo baby at this point, is how he was described to me, and kind of pro-Israel. And then there's the MEK, which is kind of like, the way it was described to me, is like a cult. They're flying out like Stephen Harper and Rudy Giuliani.
And Melissa Landsman and Judy
Oh,
Sproul.
really?
Yeah. Melissa Landsman took a trip there in 2023
Oh
to
my
Albania,
God.
visited the headquarters with
Wow.
former Foreign Affairs Minister John Baird. It was a
That's
big
so gross.
queer festival,
Yeah, and the US talks about them like they're the official opposition, basically. But no
Yep,
one in Iran
John
talks about them
McCain.
like that.
John
So,
McCain would visit. This
yeah.
is the MEK is a death cult. The MEK was very effective in getting themselves off the terror list. Harper took them off the terror list here after the US took them off the terror list in 2012. And I'm going to tell you something right now that is going
Yeah.
to blow your freaking mind.
Can't wait.
The person who was the lawyer for the MEK in the United States to get them off the terror list was the woman who was just appointed last year to the Supreme Court by Trump. What was her name? Oh, God. Amy Coney Barrett.
Jesus
That is
Christ,
her
that's
name.
it. Oh, I can't believe I just left my brain.
Amy Coney Barrett was the lawyer for the
Wow.
Mujahideen. And so
That's
this is
wild.
such a weird bedfellows coming together here, because
Mm-hmm.
the Mujahideen in the 1960s and 70s in Iran were responsible for killing American generals who were inside Iran. This is very well known. But, give Rudy Giuliani $10,000 and he'll fly out to Paris or Albania and give a speech and say how Mariam Rajavi, the cult leader of the MEK, is the best thing. And I'll tell you something else. This is something that will be exclusive to you. There was a meeting held a couple days ago where Melissa Landsman was in that meeting, and I can't tell you who my source was, but she said that the best opposition right now is the MEK.
Wow.
The best group. So there's some things this is a thing that Iranians are scared of, because the MEK sided with Saddam Hussein in the 8-year war between Iran and Iraq. They took up arms against the people of Iran. And so Iranians remember this very well. Okay. And they also remember that Reza Pahlavi went to, and remember this is when hundreds of thousands of people were on the streets of Tel Aviv protesting against Netanyahu. Reza Pahlavi took a trip to Israel during that time through the invitation of Israel's intelligence. I think her name is Gila something. She is head of their intelligence. She invited him there, and he went to the Wailing Wall, put his hand there. The thing.
The whole thing. Yeah.
Everybody wore the kippah. And so he went there during this time, a time when the people of Israel were saying, "We don't want Netanyahu." So this is something that everybody remembers. And right now our community is very disparate. We are a divided community, rightly so. For many, many reasons. I don't think, and I'll tell you this, I don't think that unity is always a good thing. I have watched people come together. The masses, when they come together over one thing, it isn't always a good thing that happens. It usually leads to fascism. So I'm okay with our community being, griping and picking at one another, because we are in a very dangerous place right now. Iranians, by and large, do not like this government, but they love their country more than they hate this government. And I've been telling people this, and they're like, yeah, but this is the time. And I'm like, no, this isn't the time.
Exactly.
Because two things could happen. You could have a brutal civil war, inside the country.
Yeah,
And the last thing we want is somebody coming from outside and appointing some sort of puppet government,
exactly.
because that's not going to be a good thing. So, the other thing, Rachel, that I really want to implore to your listeners and your
Yeah.
audience is that change was happening in Iran.
Mm,
In 2023, they elected probably the biggest reformist president that we have had in the last 46 years. And after the woman life freedom movement, you would be hard pressed to find women wearing a veil in the streets of uh,
mm,
Tehran. Um, and so change was happening incrementally. A lot of our artists had won awards. They were allowed to go and get those awards, come back. Now, that might not seem like a big thing to people, but it is a big thing in Iran, a very big thing. And Nargis Mohammadi, who is the Nobel Peace Prize winner, she was supposed to go back to prison. She was on medical furlough. She was supposed to go back to prison in December. She has done dozens of interviews, Vogue Italia, British Vogue, Time Magazine. She spoke to our very own Margaret Atwood for Time Magazine. She has still not been taken back to prison. This is more than
mm.
8 months after she was supposed to go back. So change was happening. But guess what's happened in the past 2 days since this little escapade that Israel and America launched? There is now a crackdown on human rights activists within the country. There is now a
Wow.
crackdown on artists, on painters, on people, on dissidents within the country. So the only thing, and I wrote about this in the Globe and Mail 10 days ago,
Yeah,
I said the only people who are going to lose are going to be the actual people that they purport to want to save.
yeah,
So that crackdown has now begun. Hossein Ronari, who is a huge voice in Iran's dissident community inside the country, was arrested. He has not been heard from since. And so this is what happens when the outside meddles with the people who are actually trying to affect change on the ground in Iran. They are the ones who suffer.
that is exactly why I think your voice is so important right now, because this is the context that every newsroom should have at the forefront of its coverage, because it would prevent harm. But that doesn't seem to be the priority, which is why I'm going to pivot a little bit right now, because I want to have a conversation with you about the media and about the coverage, not just of Iran, but of Gaza. Um,
Oh,
you,
gosh.
you, yeah, I know. You spoke out this week, among other Canadian journalists, to demand that to seriously oversimplify it, stop screwing up coverage of the genocide. Can I
Yeah.
ask you, why do you think our peers are so reluctant to do this?
Um, this is a question that I've been asking myself for years.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have said to me, it's getting better, Samira. And I actually think it's getting worse.
Mm,
Um, and I'll tell you why I say that. It's because there is a strange doubling down on Zionist narrative. Even when this whole charade is being blown wide open, and we see the way Israel has killed journalists, the way it has killed journalism itself in many ways,
yeah.
and the dismantling of the entire international rules-based system, the killing of United Nations workers, the blowing up of UN buildings. I always remember, and I go back to this, in 2021, 2022, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International put out two reports, which essentially called Israel an apartheid state.
Yeah.
And we didn't cover it. And I remember thinking, we would never do this with any other report. The Uyghurs, China, we covered
Yeah.
it. We didn't wait for the gavel to drop on the Rohingya and say that Myanmar is conducting a genocide. Canada was one of the first countries to come out. Bob Rae actually went and visited those camps. We didn't wait for it to work its way through the International Court of Justice, which is the bilge that Mark Carney is spewing. Oh,
Yeah,
I don't want to politicize the term. What? It's
exactly.
not a
Yeah,
political term. It's a
exactly.
legal, it's a legal term. And so I think things are getting worse. And, we launched the Canadian Journalists for Justice in Palestine, not just out of frustration, but out of seeing that our craft and our credibility as journalists, as media outlets, over the past 20 months has been decimated.
Yeah,
And we have nobody to blame but ourselves. And it goes back to your question about why, and I really think it's fear. There is such a level of cowardice
yeah,
and careerism. And because people know once you're called an anti Semite by honest reporting or by anybody else, I had the Israeli ministry come after me.
Jesus.
So
I mean, honestly, kudos, because that means that what you're doing is impactful and you scared
well, I
them.
wear it as a crown. I'm going to tell you
You
this
should.
right now. If you call yourself a journalist and you've been reporting on Gaza and you haven't been called an anti Semite yet, you're not doing your job.
Yeah.
You are not doing your job. And so I think there is a real fear, and rightly so, because you must know this very well, Rachel. If you are if you are called an anti Semite, you're done.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to touch you in this media industry that we have. You're on your own. So you need to figure out a way to make money. We need to figure out a way to be employable, even if
Yeah.
it's just for ourselves. And we do everything. We shoot, we edit, we write, we produce. I mean, the things that we are doing on our own as independent journalists would be unheard of 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But in order to be able to report truthfully on Palestine, that's what you need to do. And you know what? We're doing it. We're going to do it.
You
And you know what?
especially.
And to our journalists to who can't, because I'll tell you something, and I talk about the CBC a lot because I was there for nearly 10 years, both as host and
Yeah.
producer. There are people inside that building who are doing excellent work. Yasmin Hassan, Sarah Jabakanji. Like, there are people who are doing stuff on the ground and getting those voices who are on the ground in those stories and getting it published in digital. Mohammed Rashini, all of these people are doing excellent work, but they're all being targeted by honest reporting as they do it. And
Yeah.
I'm not privy to what their managing editors are doing to them. But if it's any indication of what I went through, it's not a good time for people who are trying to report the truth. So I give kudos to those journalists who are still trying to work within the system, because sometimes, when you try to work within the system just ends up changing you. And so I applaud them. Really, it's not
Yeah.
easy at all what they're trying to do.
Yeah. And I think anyone who's had a conversation with these people behind the scenes, not naming names, and I haven't spoken to the individuals you listed, but it does take such a toll.
It's
And some of
exhausting.
them are still fighting. And, between you and me, we've got CBC, CTV, and Global. Like, we've been in those newsrooms. And
Yeah.
it's clearly a very institutional systemic issue, because you're echoing everything that I have encountered and seen and heard. So I know you have a hard out in about 5 minutes, and I
Yeah.
promised that we would get back to Carney talking about Zionist Palestine.
Oh my
My
God.
God. I barely saw coverage of it, first of all, despite Canada's largest Muslim advocacy organization
Yeah.
calling for an apology. I mean,
I didn't
what do
see
you
it
make
actually.
of this? Yeah.
I didn't see it on CBC. I didn't see it on CTV or Global. I saw it on CNN. Uh,
Really?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Well, it was in the interview. Yeah.
yeah, that's where I saw it.
Yeah.
And I think Amanpour also put it on her social media. Uh,
Okay.
and so that I just couldn't believe it. And I have to say this. I don't think Mark Carney knows much about this issue. I really
I don't
don't.
think so
So,
either. No.
and I don't think he understands how dangerous what he actually said is.
Yeah.
You know, it's sort of like saying to somebody in the South in the 30s and 40s, okay, you can have this little pocket of 40 acres and a mule, but you need to be okay with the KKK. All right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's
Exactly.
exactly what it means. When you're
Yeah.
telling a Palestinian who has watched or been the victim of a genocide, that you just can't voice because you think it politicizes it, that's basically what you're saying to the Palestinians. That's not okay. And Mark Carney really does need to apologize for this. It is a breach of any sort of morality, first and foremost, but it's a breach of international law. The Palestinians do not have to accept their own subjugation in order to have a state. And listen, anybody
Exactly.
who understands this knows that the two-state fantasy was just blown out of the water more than a decade ago. It's impossible to have a two-state now with more than 700,000
Mhm.
squatters, illegals. I call them squatters, by the way.
That's accurate.
They're squatting and they are enacting. I mean, we saw a pogrom yesterday, brutal, in Taibe, which is the main Palestinian Christian neighborhood. So this isn't a matter of Jewish versus Muslim either. Let's get rid of
Yeah.
this whole another myth that people like to promulgate. This is Palestinians under attack,
Yeah.
and these homeless Israeli youth that the Jewish National Fund gives money to enact these pogroms on a daily basis against
Yeah.
Palestinians, which never get reported, right?
Exactly.
That is just left out of the media. The footage is there. Our own Margaret Evans at the CBC did a great. This is, I think, 8 or 9 months ago. A great look at at what goes on in the occupied West Bank. It didn't get much coverage. I think it should have been really looked at over and over and over again. And she came under attack by these very same settlers,
Wow.
squatter youth. So there is work being done, but it is so spotty
Yeah.
and greatly just like when it comes out, it just goes. Normally, if we had a situation like this, every outlet, CBC is not just the national, right?
Yeah.
You would get radio on this, you would get syndication on this, it would go across the country. Everybody would be talking to Margaret, but that just really didn't happen.
Yeah. And that's our failure, as Canadians. That's the Canadian media. Like, it is our
The
shame.
Americans do a much better job. And I had somebody was very surprised when I said this a while back, but I think when it comes back to your question about why,
Yeah.
and I was saying about the cowardice and the fear, I think the Americans do a much better, fearless sort of reporting on Gaza and Israel's
Yeah.
crimes in Gaza. You would never have a host like Ayman Mohyeddin here in Canada like you do in America on MSNBC. It just wouldn't happen.
It's funny. Sana Saeed said the same thing on this podcast that
Oh,
Canadian
really?
media has uniquely disappointed her. Like
Yeah.
with how bad it is. Samira, I've already gone over time. I'm so sorry about that. But I just want to
Yes,
thank
yes,
you. I want to thank you so much. You get a lot of requests and you don't take them all, like the one you got from Canada Land. Iconic
yes.
response, by the way. So I very much
The
appreciate you taking the
audacity,
time.
the audacity to think that
I
your publisher can
know.
go around saying shit about me, and then I'm just gonna go, yeah, sure, I'll come on.
It's wild. Anyways, your response was iconic. So I am very, very honored that you said yes. Thank you so much for taking the time. For anyone who is listening, and I kept singing the praises of your work, and now they want to go check it out, where can they keep up with you?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on patreon.com/on the line media. You can also go to the YouTube page where I do a lot of intimate conversations with voices you won't hear elsewhere. And that's also at On the Line Media. So you can find me there.
Great. And you're also very active on Instagram, I
Oh, yeah,
believe,
you
and
can
all
find me on
socials and
Instagram,
everything. So,
yeah, at
yeah,
Mohyeddin. Yep,
awesome. Okay. Samira,
yeah,
thank you so much for your time.
thanks. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Bubble Pop. I'm Rachel Gilmore, your least favorite person's least favorite journalist. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing on YouTube, Patreon, Substack, or wherever you like to listen. You can also find me on TikTok, Instagram, Twitch, and Blue Sky. I'd like to say a special thank you to Hans Vivian Wenzel for making the incredibly groovy music for Bubble Pop. You can find his music on Spotify under the artist name Hans. That's a lowercase h with an exclamation mark. Thanks again for spending this time with me. I could not do this work without your support, and I am so grateful for it. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.